we will always create these crises. Imperialism will always create these crises. And why do I say that? So what is this crisis? All right. So if you think about what occurred in when was this was in Bretton Woods, right? In right after World War II, up until World War II, one of the things that came after World War II is we had the entire world literally moved to the dollar standard. The United States at that time had 2/3 of the gold in the world. And it was decided post World War II by the quote unquote the victors that we would go to the dollar. So assuming that based on the premise that the United States in Fort Knox had about 2/3 of the world's gold. So that's what the Bretton Woods Accord was about. It was moving to that gold standard. But by 1970, when the economic collapse took place in the United States, we moved away from even the gold standard. And whenever these crises take place, what the elites do is they move further and further away from the economy actually be tied to something real, which means, let's say, labor or directly connected to, let's say, some precious metal like gold, where it's actually representative of labor power. So people move away from a real economy to a fake economy, which is based on promissory notes, which is what currency is. So 1970 was a very important point in US and world history because there was a major economic collapse, and that is when we moved to the petrodollar. Now, why is all of this important? Is because when you start connecting these dots, what you start realizing is that the elites have this very interesting vicious cycle that they don't know how to get out of. What is this vicious cycle that we're talking about? The vicious cycle is there is a point during the early stages of capitalism where the economy matched, or the exchange of commodities matched with reality. But one of the features of this system is that it's all about massive competition. How do you compete? Because one of the features is to maximize profit, whatever it takes. So if you have 5 people or 10 people in a particular field competing, what you're trying to do is you're going to try to lower cost. How do you lower cost? Either you pay people less wages, or you come up with new technologies, capital, goods, manufacturing capabilities, where you can get more out of labor. So if you go to a lot of these car facilities, you have very few people running these robots, for example. So in that model, you literally are creating unemployment, but you're creating a very efficient way of producing goods. And this is what's interesting. And this is the contradiction. You start overproducing. So competition drives such a level of productivity. In fact, if you look from 1970, and I want everyone to understand the statistics, to today, we've had a 77% growth in productivity. So between 1970 to today, we've had a 77% growth in productivity, which means the elites have learned how to run these systems through robotics, manufacturing better and better. But wages have only gone up by 12.4%. So the GDP has actually grown between 1970 to today, which means the wealth has actually grown all over the world. Productivity has increased, but people's wages in real dollars is actually, when you work out inflation, is actually flat. So economies have grown for the elites, but wages have been flat. So what does that do? So you produce lots of goods, and then you have greater unemployment, which means you have an effective lowering of demand because unemployed people can't buy the stuff. So you have overproduction. And when you have demand, when you don't have enough demand, then these same companies do not invest in infrastructure. So right now, Apple is sitting on about $255 billion worth of cash. Companies have a ton of cash. It's not like there's not enough cash. In fact, there's a lot of goods out there. When you look at the supply chain problem, it's not like there's not enough supply. It's the ability to distribute those goods. But there's a lot of goods out there, a lot of cash, but working people's wages are flat and going down. So between 1970 till today, what has actually happened is if you are making around $50,000 today, you should actually be making about $120,000. That's $70,000 over the last 50 years was actually given to the elites. This is why in the last 2 years, 600 billionaires made $2.3 trillion in value. They grew. So this is very important to understand. So these vicious cycles are because of monopoly global imperialism. We talked about the baby formula. There's only 3 people who make baby formula, and no one else can get into it. So they've ensured that no one else can compete with them. So you have monopoly capitalism, or what I call global imperialism. And global imperialism will always end up in these vicious cycles. So I hope everyone's understanding what I'm saying. The nature of money is a historical context. Money ultimately should reflect value. But when money gets disconnected from real value through currency, right, which is manipulated, then you will have these cycles, these boom and bust cycles. That's what occurred on October October 29th, 1929. You had a major bust. Now, the reality is the nature of global imperialism is it'll always have these booms and busts, booms and busts. So how do the elites get out of this? One way is they start coming up with wacky theories where their model is a government will centrally top-down control stuff, or they'll come up with Bitcoin, which is another wacky concept that is divorced from reality, but it doesn't address the central issue. And the central issue that the elites do not want addressed is that ultimately working people need to control their means of production, because they will, when economies are decentralized to working people, we will actually not have these booms and busts because people will decide what they actually need. We're not going to produce a bunch of crap that we don't need that sits in warehouses, or grain and stuff that sits there that never gets utilized. Because frankly, I was in India recently. India produces so much food. They actually put it in silos and make sure farmers do not sell it, and they actually sell it at 1 cent on the dollar to produce liquor to feed people so they all get blitzed out. But this is the nature of global imperialism. It's a fake, illusory economic system. So again, if you look from 1940, it was World War II that the elites used to really employ people, get a lot of people killed. But between 1940 to 1970, the GDP of the world grew, and it grew, and working people also had their wages grow. Why? Because during that period, there were powerful bottoms-up movements. Let me repeat that again. During this period, wages did grow and the economy grew. Why? Because working people got their shit together and they organized bottoms-up movements. They were real trade unions bottoms up. But starting in 1950, there was a big wave of anti-communism, anti-socialism, led by the right wing, that anytime you said working people unite, they said that must be communist. And then the left wing, people like Bernie Sanders and AOC and Elizabeth Warren and all these kinds of people, the Labour Party in UK, used that opportunity that the quote unquote attack on communism, which actually destroyed bottoms up movements, to overtake unions and do these top down movements, the not so obvious establishment. So by 1970, globally, if you look in any part of the world, wherever you are, you will see that you'll have a left wing and a right wing. One says they're pro-labor and one says they're conservatives, they want austerity measures, and they both piston pump this back and forth. All right. This brings us, let me go back to our agenda here. We've covered now brief history, what is money, this vicious cycle. And what you'll notice is that working people always be victims of this crisis, because at every cycle of this turn, you get working people's wages going down further and further down, the elites getting more and more control. But the elites have found themselves in a big conundrum right now, because this is where they're headed. The conundrum is they have these boom and bust cycles. So in 1929, 1930s, they brought in Keynes, who said, oh, yeah, I believe in capitalism, but we got to have government control. And then they did a world war to really get people employed. So the conundrum now, as you've noticed, is Trump literally printed, in the last 4 years, he printed $6.9 trillion. Think about that. That's over 30% of the GDP of the United States was printed in 4 years. The GDP of which really measures the entire income of the US economy, $22 trillion. Trump printed in one term close to $7 trillion. That's 35%. Why does he have to print money? This brings us now to modern monetary theory. So what is modern monetary theory? Again, point 5, you see the left and right really have no solution. So what they do is they come up with band-aid solutions. They try to come up with these sexy band-aid solutions. Bitcoin or quantitative easing means nothing more than printing money. How does the Fed print money? You know what? They don't even print it anymore. The central banks, by the way, the United States, the UK, Canada, and Australia, which are big, by the way, which are the ones have their own currency still. Most of the EU, Greece, and all these countries have to rely on the ECB, the European Central Bank. Most countries can't print their currency. They're still colonies. But these 4 countries are the ones which are big proponents of modern monetary theory. So the left and right really have no solutions. So they've gone to what's called quantitative easing in the United States, which really is a dollar standard. So they have immense power through imperialism and war. So they've said, we're going to quantitative ease you. What does that mean? It means that the Fed literally goes to all the local banks and they literally, let's say the bank only had $1,000 in their bank account. They literally add another zero and overnight, the bank's got $10,000. It's literally used with a stroke of a keyboard. They're quote unquote printing money. Literally. And you can go look at Mackie. That's what they say. It's literally printing money using the keyboard. So what does MMT say? So modern monetary theory, which is a theoretical basis of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Obama and Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders, all of them, because they don't know what else to do but to simply simply print money. So MMT, modern monetary theory, says, they say, you know what? The whole concept of deficit doesn't make any sense. And this is their reaction to austerity programs. Austerity says, hey, we need to control spending. So they say the old theory was that they said if the government was compared to your household. And everyone knows this, when politicians are on, they say, look, if you run a household, you shouldn't be spending more money than the income. The modern monetary theorists, what they say is you can't compare a government to a household. And they say the big difference is the government is actually an issuer of currency. You as an individual or a local government, and they make this distinction, can't issue currency. But they forget that Greece can't issue currency. All the quote unquote poor countries can't. It's only about 4 countries. And interesting enough, these 4 countries are the ones where I said modern monetary theory is coming out of. So what they say is, look, government is not like a household. That was the old theory. Government can actually print whatever money it wants. And government should print money, because their view is if the government has, let's say, $1,000 and it prints money, let's say $1,000, and then it taxes people, let's say $100, then the government has essentially put net $900 into the economy. So you are getting 900 surplus. So they're saying a government quote unquote deficit is people's surplus. Sounds all very interesting, but think about what they're actually saying. What they're actually saying is that this money goes back to the definition of money. Their view is that money, the definition of money is that the state prints money, that money is defined by the state issuing money. So just like Bitcoin, the modern monetary theorists are completely whacked. They make it sound all good. It's a big con game, but they're saying money is created by government, and the government can take away money. So the government creates money, and the government can take away money through taxes. So if you have, now here's a problem. If you go back to the real definition of money is commodity, money really should reflect the total amount of commodities in the market. So if you have 10 units of commodities, which include labor and actual goods, you should have about 10 units of money. It should be 1-to-1. But if you print 1,000 units of money to that 10 units, you've essentially done a 100-to-1 ratio, which means that's called inflation. So the modern monetary theory says, yes, we know this could cause inflation, but we know how to control that. We'll just tax people. Because their theory is you print as you need to support projects like the Green New Deal. And if inflation happens, which is happening right now, you'll just tax people. So they claim centrally at the government level, you will control through fiscal policy the economy. Now, what are they really saying? What they're really saying is we're in a major problem, and we don't know how to handle our booms and busts, just like in 1929. So we're going to come up with a neo-Keynesian model. Remember, neo-Keynesian means the government intervenes, but we're going to call it modern monetary theory. There's nothing modern about this monetary theory. Neither is it based on the real definition of money, which should reflect the value of commodity exchange, nor is it modern. It is basically Keynesian wrapped up. It's neo-Keynesian theory. Again, not to get lost in these terms, but neo-Keynesian means top-down centralized control. That's what we're talking about.